Chapter 11. Crunch.
Chesney, buddy, you gotta wake up. What?
Chesney managed to get out. He opened his eyes to a world steeped in red.
Where? I'm certain. Dude, this isn't the time. Come on, we gotta keep moving.
It was Tail, grabbing his hand and tugging him along the forest. The sky was red, bathing everything in its dark glow. Everything that wasn't red was black. Chesney let himself be led on by his friend, still not understanding. Tail was looking away from him, ahead. Always ahead. Whoosh! Crack it. And what was that sound? Looking around, he could see some familiar sights. They were on the path between Ratcirk and the magic school. And far ahead, he could see the school, standing proudly on an incredibly tall hill. Just like it was.
Oh, man, I had the worst, most horrible dream. Sorry, did I oversleep? Am I missing a test?
He asked, as Tail led him between the trees. He didn't see anyone wandering around. He must really be late for class.
And why is the sky red? Wait, why am I outside the school?
Crack. Do thump.
Tail, why is everything strange?
Chesney protested, trying to tug his hand away. But the hand was so cold, and so strong.
We're almost home, buddy,
Tail said, marching onward without slowing at all.
Everyone missed you, but I'm just glad I found you and brought you back. Samzo was worried the most.
They left the woods. Before them stood a huge rocky mound, and way above at the summit was the school. And there, glistening in the red light, was the Tower of Gabnid, shining and shifting. The shape of it seemed off, however, like something was added on top. Crack, snap, thump. The sound came from the trees nearby.
What was that?
Chesney asked, trying to turn back for a better look.
Hey, relax. Just forget about it. You're home, my man,
Tail said. He dragged him closer to the great hill upon which the school now stood. But, now that they were farther from the woods, Chesney could see more of the sky and horizon. The air was thick with a reddish mist, but even so, he could still make out dark shapes falling from the heavens. Shapes slowly falling and tumbling through the sky, plunging into the forest, plunging into the sea, falling across the plains.
Tail, what are those things?
He asked.
It's a bit of a steep climb, Chase, but we're almost back. Come on, just a bit further,
Tail said, leading him to the least steep part of the slope of the blackish hill. The stones were mossy, slippery and loose, but he climbed them on hands and feet. His hands were soon covered in black mud. The going was hard, and he lost grip a few times, but Tail was always there to grab him by the collar and set him back to climbing. Crunch! Crack! Crack! Above, another sound. This time one of the shapes fell nearby. It was just a few feet above them on the plateau on which the school stood. He hurried to climb those last few feet, eager to know what was falling from the red sky. One final loose stone almost sent him tumbling, but again, Tail reached back and kept his course true, and he was then hauled up to his feet.
There, doesn't it feel good to be back home, where you belong?
Tail said, waving Chesney to follow him as he walked on his own into the school grounds.
Everyone's missed you. I'll be right there,
he called, and then turned to the black shape. It took him a few moments to understand what he was seeing. Things were twisted, juxtaposed where they should not be, but he recognized it as a person. No, a body. Now. It had been chewed up, and smashed, and crushed, and now lay in a heap at his feet like so much pulp. He was a Laffrey man, one that he did not recognize. Stunned, he watched dumbly from atop the hill as the sky was filled from horizon to horizon with dark, falling shapes, falling into the forest, plunging into the oceans, covering all of Lennis. Everywhere he looked were shapes heaped upon the ground, or caught in the branches trees as they fell, or floating in the oceans.
T-Tail, what's going on? Tail!
He tried to scream, but it all came out as a whisper. He was alone. His body began to run into the school grounds. This was all impossible. He quickly tripped upon another loose stone. He turned back to see, only to find it was not a stone, but a head, barely sticking out of the mud. And when he saw that, he could no longer unsee what he had refused to see. There was no mud. It was blood, and flesh, bones, rotten clothes, hair, bodies. The whole mountain was bodies heaped up like bricks, and gore as mortar. His hands and his clothes were covered in black-red gore, bits of rotten skin, and fragments of bone. Insensible, he cried out in terror, and everything his hand or foot touched sent him a fresh new wave of horror and nausea. This was all so wrong, so impossible. He needed to get to Tail. Running through the entrance gate, instantly he was before the Tower of Gabnid, and everyone from school was on either side of a wide path to it, smiling, and clapping, cheering.
Well done. Welcome back. You're home.
They cheered, and clapped, and smiled, but they were not whole. They were broken things, burned, chewed, missing limbs, missing eyes. None of them had eyes.
No, I didn't mean it. I'm sorry, please.
At the end of the path were several recognizable figures. Each stood with their backs turned away, facing the tower and looking up. Tail, Lilouette and Luliette, Gig-Guy, Duke Dite. Samza. Behind him, the path closed as the students and faculty walked behind him, clapping, cheering, ushering him on. He couldn't look away from their empty eye sockets and smiling faces, couldn't stop chanting like a mantra.
I didn't mean it, I didn't mean it, I didn't mean it.
Tail appeared at his side, finally looking him in the face. That easy smile on his face, his perfect sea-green hair.
Hey, no, it's fine, Chesney. That sure was a great prank you pulled. Now that you're back, it's fine.
2 empty holes, like black pits drawing him inside. Duke was on the other side.
Right. Every new world needs a fresh new foundation. The new god is just setting the world right again.
His whole face was burned to the bone. Duke and Tail grabbed Chesney's arms and dragged him forward.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
Lilouette and Luliette turned and said,
So glad you could join us, Chesney. You were our favorite. It wasn't the same here without you. Shouldn't have given you that bottle, though. Eh? But now we can finally begin.
The clapping and shouting and cheering stopped instantly, and the crowd quietly formed a circle around the tower and began to prostrate themselves. Chesney was dumped to the ground. Everyone began to chant in a strange, robotic monotone.
Camino, Des-I-U, K-Mat, Camino, Des-I, K-Mat, Camino, Des-I-Tai, K-Mat.
High above, the great shape atop the Tower of Gabnid shifted and roared, and the light rain of bodies falling from on high became a deluge. The air filled with the sounds of dozens, hundreds, thousands of sickening cracks as untold new bodies rained upon the land, burying it in death. A pair of soft hands wrapped around Chesney from behind him and held him sweetly. A young girl's voice. Samza's voice.
Chesney, what took you so long? I missed you so much. I never got to say what I was really feeling. To tell you how I truly felt.
Soft lips touched his ear and whispered,
It's not fair that you got to live, Chesney. It's your fault we died, and you left us to rot. But I forgive you. Now. You are where you belong.
The hands gently caressed his cheek and turned him to face her. That same pale, light-kissed face. Her pink hair, swaying in the breeze. He closed his eyes. No, he couldn't look. He couldn't.
We can finally be together, Chesney. Witness the beginning of a new world, together. Create the new world, together. Open your eyes. Look at me.
Curse him. He did. 2 black pits where her beautiful storm-gray eyes had been. She held his face, tight, like cold iron.
I love you, Chetsney. I love you. Be with me. Be for me.
She pressed her lips to his. Chesney fell to the floor, screaming louder than he ever had in his life. His night clothes were drenched in sweat. He had no clue where he was. It was dark. He couldn't think beyond his terror. He covered his mouth to muffle the scream, but doing so only reminded him. Cold, dead lips, soulless, eyeless faces. Out of the darkness, a girl's voice.
Chetsney, are you okay?
A soft voice at his ear. More panic. He scrambled across the floor, away, bashing into things he could not see.
No! Stay away! Stay away from me!
A door. A handle. Instantly he was out, crashing into the hall. Running. Away. Had to get away.
Chesney, where are you going?
The sound of rain. Pitter-patter-tie. Pitter-patter. Crunch. Crack. There wasn't enough air. Couldn't breathe. Another door. And a cold rush of wind. And rain. True rain. Dark skies. Bricks beneath his feet. He could breathe again. He was cold and wet, but he could breathe. He could think. Taking in air with deep, gasping breaths, he fell to his knees and let the elements do as they would. Every rumble of thunder sent his body trembling, but the panic was lessening with every shaking breath. It had been the worst, most vivid nightmare yet, since leaving. Once the terror began to no longer be on the forefront of his mind, it was replaced with other emotions, just as painful. Anger at himself for reacting so strongly, like some child. Shame at making a scene in the middle of the night like that. He'd probably woken everyone. Regret at seeing them all again. D for me. And despair. Medea called out from somewhere behind him.
Chesney, where are you?
Accompanied by the splashes of bare feet on wet bricks. The storm made it impossible to see in the dark of the night. There were no stars, no moon, and any lights that might have lit up Geraint during the evenings had long been put out. For a handful of heartbeat, he considered just staying silent. He almost couldn't bear the thought of Medea seeing him like this. But the thought of her out in this storm, worried for him, made him feel worse.
I'm here,
he rasped. Footsteps, and then searching hands finding him. A pair of soft hands holding him sweetly. He jerked away, landing in a fresh puddle.
Stay back.
He cursed his own weakness.
Sorry. I'm sorry, Medea. I just need a minute.
A very pregnant pause followed. Very quietly, she said,
It's okay. Can I give you this cloak to keep you out of the rain?
He felt so stupid, useless, and the anxiety of having to try to explain what just happened, any of it, made him want to just turn and run away. But that wouldn't be fair.
Thank you.
He reached a hand out to where he thought Medea's direction was, and eventually felt one of their traveling cloaks. He took it and wrapped it around himself.
Another nightmare?
She asked. No judgment in her voice, only understanding. But his own self-loathing made it feel like pity.
Yeah. I'm sorry for freaking out like that. I must have looked pathetic. Chesney, no. You, more than anyone. Nobody can judge you for something like this.
A moment later.
Can I? Come closer. Now?
The thought of her sitting beside him out here, it filled him once more with a flurry of emotion. Relief, pain, shame, anxiety. He needed someone there. But what if he overreacted again? She said again, with something unreadable in her voice.
I don't have to. If it makes you uncomfortable. No. It was just Just something from the nightmare. It's okay now. I know it's not real. You can. Sit by me, I mean.
A pause, followed by more splashes, and the rustling of cloth beside him. Minutes passed in silence before she tried to engage once more.
Do you want to talk about it?
There was nothing in that dream he ever wanted anyone to see.
No, but I probably should.
With long pauses between, he haltingly explained his nightmare. She stayed quiet, aside from the occasional murmur to assure him she was still listening. He planned to leave out the real way the nightmare ended, make up something to tell her. That part of his nightmare was so deeply personal, and painful, and awkward, and horrible. He felt so ashamed that his mind had used her like that, though, that there was a part of him that missed her, and that had wanted to be with her, and to turn it like that, twist it around and use her that way. It felt so wrong. He felt disgusting. And it just wasn't something you should share, those most deeply personal parts of your dreams. But then that part of the nightmare had come, and the words came out. How his nightmare version of her said she loved him, and blamed him, and wanted him to die. For her. Maybe he had wanted Midia to understand why he had reacted the way he had when she came to him. Or maybe he wanted her to know, so she could condemn him.
Chesney, that's awful. No wonder you were terrified. I've never had a nightmare that sounded so vivid, or horrifying.
The sound of rustling cloth.
It's okay if you don't want to, or you don't think you're ready. But, I was wondering, can I hug you?
He waited for the rise in his hear trait, or the panic to set in. But it didn't. He nodded, then remembered it was pitch black out, and said,
Sure.
She shuffled over, and wrapped 2 cold, wet arms around him. She didn't say anything, just held him. He reached a hand out from under the cloak and held her arm. It was then he realized that Midia wasn't wearing a rain cloak of her own, and was likely in the middle of turning into an icicle out here in the pouring rain. With real outrage, Chesney protested,
Midia, did you give me your cloak?
Now that he realized it, he could hear the shudder in her breathing and the slight shivering of her arms.
Well, I don't know. I just ran after you, and brought the cloak thinking I'd have to search for you outside. And then, when I found you, all I could think was that you sounded so alone and scared, and I wanted to protect you.
He snapped to his feet, wrapped them both in the cloak, and led them back inside. Her skin was indeed like ice. The dining room where he led her was still illuminated by the tiniest remainder of a candle on the table. It was tricky, using the spirits in situations like this, to do things with more or less power on purpose. So much easier to use them at their greatest strength. But he did his best to hold on to the little darting flame in his mind, to warm himself quickly, and to pass that heat on to her. She gasped in relief at his warmth, saying through chattering teeth,
Oh, okay. And maybe I am a little cold.
He left her for a moment to drag a dry blanket from his bed, and returned, exchanging the wet cloak for it and wrapping them both inside so he could warm her up faster.
You're going to give me an ulcer. Well, I couldn't just leave you out there.
He sighed.
Well, I'm sorry I'm an idiot.
He paused for a beat, then added with the tiniest sliver of levity,
And I'm sorry that you're an idiot, too. Hey.
She giggled. The moment didn't last long, but it was warm. Part of the nightmare stuck in his brain, though, a small, niggling little piece that had caught his attention in the retelling. Something familiar that he hadn't thought about since it happened. That chanting. He'd heard it before, or something like it, and now that he heard it again, he really thought he knew what it meant.
Say, Midia, Femigno desi kemat Does that ring any bells with you?
He asked.
No. Wasn't it just gibberish from your dream?
He shook his head.
No. Now that I hear it again, I remember. When I touched the hand-shaped depression in Dahlgren, there was a whole lot of gibberish from some unseen voice. and the last thing I heard was, Femigno Desi, K-Mat.
She looked at him.
Really? What do you think it means?
The more he mulled it in his mind, the more right it felt.
I think K-Mat is its name.
Puzzled, Medea asked.
Name? The name of what?
He returned her gaze.
The monster. I think its name is K-Mat.
The morning came too soon for them both. Chesney, severely sleep-deprived, and Medea having a case of the sniffles. Gorf, of course, managed to sleep through the entire thing, while Medea tried to put herself together, half asleep and blowing her nose every minute. Chesney said he would go see about some food, and then they could plan their day.
Okay, I'll be out in in a minute,
she said miserably, sounding completely plugged up. Rattling windows and the constant pitter-patter of rain told him the storm hadn't lessened in the slightest, not to mention this new growing headache. It was not the start to a good day. The common area was about a third full of guests, though curiously all of them lacking in food yet. Maybe it was a bit late coming? He decided to go and ask about it.
Excuse me, is anyone here?
He asked at the seemingly empty front desk area. A cranky woman's voice answered from the kitchen area beyond.
Yeah, keep your pants on. Slept in. If I ever get my hands on the wacko that scared me awake last night, I'll wring their neck.
Chesney winced in guilt, though there was a curious quality to her voice that distracted him from the embarrassment, something he couldn't place. He almost tried to pretend it never happened, but he felt bad enough about how Medea was feeling a little ill. He wouldn't try to weasel out of this.
Yeah, sorry about that. I had a really bad dream. I really want to apologize.
There was the clattering of some kind, and then the woman appeared in the doorway, waving around a wooden rolling pin. She was a Laffrey with curly red hair, wearing an apron and covered in flour and other stains.
Well, at least you have the common decency to. Great, Cormu. Chesney, is that you? What on Lennis are you doing out here in Jerain?
He stepped back in shock. Was he seeing things? Was any of this real, or another cruel dream?
No, that's impossible. Luliet, is that you? Well, of course it's me, you silly boy. But just what? Whoa, hey.
She began, but was interrupted by Chesney dashing around the counter and holding her in a fierce hug. Luliet laughed nervously.
It's nice to see you too.
He couldn't respond at first. But she was real. She was alive. Someone else had somehow survived the disruption of the magic school. But still, something seemed not right.
Luliet, I can't believe you're okay. How did you survive?
She extricated herself from him and gave him a bemused expression.
Survive? What are you on about, Chesney?
Oh, immortals, she doesn't know. Beside himself with worry, he couldn't decide how to tell her. Should he tell her? How could he not? But then, would she hate him for what he did, no matter how much it was an accident?
Luliet,
he began, so quietly he could almost not hear himself.
I don't know how to tell you this, but the School of Magic was destroyed. Everyone is dead. Except me, Headmaster Dacant. And now, you?
The rolling pin clattered to the floor from her stunned hand.
What? No, that's impossible. I was just... How? But... Wait, is that what everyone meant by all the trouble out east? Yes, there's a lot we...
He was interrupted by a voice approaching from down the hall, miserable and stuffy.
Chesney, where did you get to? Did you find any food? Gorf got us a Oh, there you are? Who is that?
Luliet and Medea asked at the same time.
It's a long story,
he said to both of them.
Let's go grab a table and talk.
Luliet hauled a big basket of freshly baked rolls into the common room, next to a little container of butter, and then sat with Chesney, Medea, and also Gorf to talk. Chesney introduced Luliette as the school nurse. She, and her sister, Lilouette, the dorm matron, had given him the bottle of minicetamol the day of the disaster. He then explained that Midia was a spiritualist from Ratzer, and Gorf was a mercenary from Hagudo. And then he went on to explain, in full detail, the events of that day as he experienced them. He contemplated keeping his involvement in the disaster a secret, but there was no way he could lie to her. And even though this was new information to Gorf, he just accepted that as a necessary evil. Gorf stayed respectfully quiet throughout, however. Throughout the explanation, from Duke's dare, the tower being opened, and their journey upwards, her face slowly transformed to surprise, to shock. And then, when he finally had to tell of the hand-shaped device, Dahlgren, the monster K-Mat, the destruction of the school, and the madness of the headmaster, her expression grew paler and paler. She covered her mouth.
Lilouette? Is she?
He could only avert his eyes.
I'm sorry.
After a time, he asked,
But what happened to you?
She recovered a bit of her color from the shock, and waved her hands around as she explained.
The day before, I got a letter from our parents saying they needed someone to watch the inn while they attended to some business for a while. I put in my notice for some time away, and not long after we gave you the bottle, I set out on a mount straight away for home. I stopped over for a spell in Hagudo, and then that night there was this horrible rumbling, and so I booked it out of there straight away and headed to Jerain. I've been watching the inn ever since.
She looked at his face, his clothes, and armor, Midia, and Gorf.
It looks like you had a more difficult time getting here. What happened to you?
This part of the story was much easier for him to tell. He went on to tell her about Midia's kidnapping, her rescue, the troubles with the Skuru and Denebra Mountain, saving Hagudo, and ending up here only to find Daphne gone. Luliette's expression went from interest to concern, and settled into horrified by the end of the whole story.
Goodness sakes, Chesney, that's insane. Are you okay?
She began to manhandle him and check him all over. She made new and increasingly sadder faces at every deep bruise, scar, and tender joint.
Oh, Chesney, dear, you need to rest. You're in shambles. And Midia, you poor thing,
she added, looking over her as well and frowning deeply. Soon she stopped her fussing and began to give them a bit of medical care and handed Midia a folk remedy for cold, to which she was grateful.
Oh, that headmaster. When I see him, I'm going to deck him one. Sending a child off to do all this.
When she was done, though, she seemed to deflate and covered her face with her hands.
And by Sophie's mercy, what will happen to all of Lenneth? No wonder everything has been going to hell in a handbasket. First Hagudo, and the rain here in Jerain, those soldiers from Sasquatch.
Wait a second, what was that?
Did you say soldiers from Sasquatch?
Chesney and Midia asked in unison, though Midia slightly muffled from the roll in her mouth. She uncovered her face and turned to a corner of the room with a sour expression. There were 2 Fiorla men in some kind of uniforms sitting quietly together.
Oh yes, those 2. Though they call themselves the Diplomatic Corps. Faugh. It's hardly diplomacy when you're here to tell the mayor there's a massive task force of ground troops marching from Sasquatch on order from their leader, Lord Zagos.
Midia practically spit out her bread to shout.
Did you say, Lord Zagos?
The entire room turned to look at them, including the 2 soldiers. Luliette leaned in and asked in hushed tones,
I take it you've heard the name before. Well, I'm not exactly an expert, but he seems to be this big leader from Sasquatch. Forced all the tribes to unite there under his tyrannical rule. It's practically a religion down there.
What does this all mean? What did Zagos want with Midia? And was he behind what happened in the Tower of Gabnid? This suddenly got so much more complicated. She continued,
Oh yeah, they've been real keen on meeting with the mayor, but so far he's found a variety of excuses to avoid them. The coward. I'm pretty sure that's why he suddenly closed up the northern checkpoint. He's terrified of more people from Sasquatch coming here. But because of all that, He's completely missed that he's got troubles brewing right here in Jerain.
Chetsney gestured to the ceiling.
The rain, you mean?
Midia chimed in as well.
Yeah, that flower thing looks a bit shaky. The Sky Temple?
Luliet asked with raised eyebrows.
Well, sure, there's that. But even more pressing is that there's a rabble of people grumbling about some kind of rebellion.
The pair exchanged a look. Gorf broke his silence, rubbing his eyes.
There's more? What's this rebellion about, then?
It was Luliet's turn to sigh.
Well, there's a whole bunch of these boys riling each other up in the tavern, talking about getting rid of the mayor over his handling of all these crises. It's like they're in this competition to one-up each other, and nobody is talking any kind of sense. Like, geez, don't we have enough problems?
Chetsney turned to Midia, a knowing grimace on his face.
What do you think our chances are of getting him to let us through the checkpoint scot-free and chasing after Daphne?
She chuckled sardonically.
Effectively 0.
Luliet bit her lip.
You two shouldn't get involved with all this.
He managed to put on something resembling a smile.
Honestly, I agree. But, right now, there's no one else. I have to follow Daphne. And even if we do manage to get out of Jerain without getting tangled up and everything, it's going to be just as dangerous past the checkpoint.
Luliet's expression turned serious.
Well, if you insist on going, then I want you to at least stop by the tavern and maybe pick up more help. Also, there's a spiritualist temple here that might be able to help you as well.
Midia looked up.
There is? Oh, maybe I can get a new spirit and I won't be so useless.
Chezzy's brow creased.
Midia, you're not useless. Why would you think that?
She winced.
You're right. Sorry. I just meant I wanted to be able to do more to help.
Chetsney didn't entirely believe her, but that conversation should happen more privately. Turning back to Luliet, he asked,
With the school gone, though, what will you do?
She looked out the window.
That's a good question. When Mom and Dad get home, I have to tell them. Have a funeral for Sis. And then, I have no idea. Maybe take over the inn, or go out to find something new. With how things are in the world, I don't know what sounds more scary.
After that, they said their goodbyes, with Chetsney getting a particularly long hug from Luliet, and made ready to leave. It was decided the first stop would be the temple. Through the wind and the rain they trudged up the muddy paths around the city, passing by onlookers and other people gawking up at the Sky Temple. People were talking about the rain as if it were some bad omen, that someone had angered the spirit of Lennis, and that the temple would fall and kill them all. Chetsney tried to put it out of his mind. He was getting used to feeling partly responsible for the various dooms that had befallen these innocent communities. But since Daphne had been here and left, he no longer felt that familiar pain. Whoever tricked me into opening the Tower of Gabnid, that's who's to blame. Be that Zagos, or someone else. I need to hold on to that. He turned to Gorf.
Gorf, I feel terrible keeping you, if you have to get back to Hagudo and Smash.
Gorf just smiled and shook his head.
Nothing that can't wait. I want to be sure you're well and truly prepared and such before I go. And you two kids seem to have a lot to prepare for.
Midia smiled.
That's very thoughtful. Gorf, I can't stress enough how great it is to have someone like you watching our backs, even if it was only for a small part of the journey.
Gorf could only make a few spluttering sounds of protest in response. At last, the spiritualist temple came into view. Why is there a spiritualist temple in this other Sky Temple? I should have asked about that. Ah well. The temple was seemingly designed like many of the other buildings here in Jerain. Buildings seemingly molded from two walls to form an arch. The base of the walls were far apart and were vertical at first, before gradually leaning closer together before sharply bending back to vertical, where they met at the top. The walls were also mostly pink, to go with the aesthetic of the massive Sky Temple's Sophie Lily, and also dotted with geometric patterns in blue and green and yellow. The temple was far more large and beautiful than the one in Retzer, but that was hardly a surprise. This was Jerain, essentially the capital of Nasquat in all but name. The stairway leading to the doors was wide, and on either side were two great statues. One was of a lightning bolt, and the other, the familiar globe of Sphere. Midia's excited face as they approached the temple fell when she recognized the statues.
Oh, it looks like there's nothing I can learn here. And now you can learn my specialty. Great. Midia, you know perfectly well that your mastery over light will completely surpass my own basically forever, right? And you already have 3 spirit. I've been stuck with 2 this whole time.
She tried to regain her neutral face, but it still looked rather crestfallen.
I know. You're right. I wanted to contribute more. You already do a ton. Midia. You think things like last night mean nothing?
Gorf's expression looked aghast.
And no, nothing like that. I just said that wrong.
Midia laughed, though it was interrupted by a coughing fit. She blew her nose, then said stuffily,
I guess I see your point. Fine.
But there was a real slight smile there. He stepped up to the large, familiar black and gold double doors and pushed them open. That familiar smell of incense hit him like a wave, taking his mind back to the last time he had come into a temple.
Whoa,
Midia said, wincing.
Even with my nose like this, I can still smell that.
The interior was much the same, but still different from the one in Retzer. There was no furniture, again. But instead of one great carpet with a symbol of Sphere, there were 2 smaller carpets, one for Sphere and one for light. On the walls were 2 shrines, doors wide, with strange symbols etched on tablets, and seated before each was another ancient-looking being of the same unrecognizable race as before. Dark, gray-green skin, fat droopy lips, wearing traditional, long purple robes. The air here was thick with incense, and a new feeling filled his awareness. Gravity, belonging, more. There was something here. The spirits of fire and Sphere within him seemed to shift into something, some feeling that was impossible to convey, but close to expectation and longing and curiosity and cold alien logic. That feeling intensified into a fierce focus, and though the room was cloudy from the incense, it was at once far sharper and distinct. Like the world outside these walls was all just a parlor trick, and only now he could see what was real. The spiritualist master of light was the only one that moved of the pair. The other seemed to sit in perpetual meditation and did not acknowledge his presence at all.
Come, young spiritualist, sit with me here.
The master of light demanded in a voice of perfect peace and calm.
Yes, revered master,
he said, now also filling with calm. He dropped his cloak, gear, and weapons, then sat before him. A long silence between them. A part of him wanted to speak, to ask the obvious question, but he felt more deeply that such was unnecessary and crass, almost blasphemous, in this place. So he waited, filling with calm and focus, feeling for the door, but it was not there yet. That strange place of Congress was not yet manifest. The actors had not taken their places.
I sense that you have been to a temple recently. Sphere, yes?
The old man said, his deep voice clear and sonorous without the hint of age.
Yes, in Ratzerk, about 5 days ago. So soon. I can feel the strong connection you have formed already. You have learned much, but there is still much more to learn. Are you prepared? I must be,
Chesney answered, in as honest a way as possible. To him, right in this moment, there was no longer prepared and unprepared. Only what is and what must be.
Tell me, young one, what do you know of the spirit of light?
A tinkling of bells. A new layer of focus. He thought back to how Midia had described it.
That to light, there is no in-between, only yes and no, on and off, here and there. It is absolutes.
The old master chuckled softly, then spoke loudly enough for the others who had come in to hear.
I see you've taken lessons before. I almost want to say that's cheating. But yes, very good. Only, there is more to it than even that.
He continued.
Light is special amongst the spirits. Taken to its logical conclusion, it could be the only spirit. But it is not like that. It is merely another spirit that governs the rules of how the elemental spirits interact. It is not simply the spirit of the light, that which comes to us from great So, or from a small candle. Not only what we can see. It is also what we cannot see, the smallest parts of nature, broken into their truest forms. Light is not the sun, nor a candle, nor a tiny spark. It is everything. Open your eyes and behold a single particle of smoke. In it, light is reflected an uncountably infinite number of times.
Chesney tried to see, tried to understand what he thought the master was trying to make him understand. That in even the smallest mote of dust, it was made up of small things, and this is where the spirit if light was made manifest. And there, he could almost understand. Things that were still were not truly still. They were vibrating. The air was not empty, but moving. It was almost too much. So hard to hold the image in his mind. The tinkling of bells.
Now, young master, focus only on your strongest element, the most familiar. Feel it. Communicate. It wants to speak to light. What does it want?
No transition. No distance. Further. Wider. More.
It wants to extend itself further. Master! To reach more, and burn more.
He could feel it. The chamber of 8 seats. Empty. Far too empty. The great door. It was knocking.
Yes. Now, open the door to it. Understand it. Commune. Understand light, young master. Let it move into you.
He tried. His eyes pinched in concentration. The feeling of light was not so alien as fear was, but almost too big, and at the same time, too small, to fully understand. His hands were becoming hot. Twin powers, a trio of powers, all ached to be released. No, only 2. He redoubled focus on fire, and light. Light. What do you want? You're everything. You're the gap between all that is small and all that is big, and the bridge between that gap. But then, if light is everything, and the bridge between everything, then everything is light. There is no beginning or end to it. The world, the universe, is but a single point. 2 twin voices shrieked and clawed and reveled and danced within. His hands, no, his whole body, was covered in small crackling arcs of electricity. They grew larger, jumping from here to there, everywhere, from him, to the room, the world, the universe. The sound intensified until he was totally aware of every single mote of dust, every particle, for that split second. And he could see how to split each mote, to break each bond, to find power in matter. Burn. At the last moment, he reined in the power of them working together. It was enough now that he understood. He knew that, properly unleashed, together they could detonate a near infinite number of explosions, indiscriminate in its carnage. But for this, he reined it into merely filling the air with a near infinite array of light sparks.
Oh, Sophie's mercy! It's beautiful.
Medea gasped, dazzled by the display, as the air filled with tiny motes of light and a subtle popping, rumbling sound. When the event was over, and the intense ethereal feeling in the air came crashing back down to reality, Chesney gasped for air. He almost slumped to the floor but managed to hold himself up with one hand. Worf looked stunned himself.
What was all that? Is that sort of stuff what you spiritualist types do all the time? Sounded like a whole pile of rocks to me, but blimey.
The revered ancient master seemed unfazed at all by the display. His peaceful, calm, half-lidded eyes merely watched Chesney passively as he regained his breath. When he did, the master said,
"Now, you have more than 2 spirits, correct? Feel inside you, for that has been unlocked. What do you sense?"
Chesney found his awareness grown to encompass something that took him a few moments to understand. Each of the spirits made their own connections to the other. Light, on its own, was able to produce bolts of lightning. Light, with sphere, produced a wall of time, or force, that reflected magic. This was what media used when I burned myself. Now I see. Lastly, fire and light, together, allowed a huge, indiscriminate attack of explosions. It was impossible to completely focus it, but he was still excited to have another tool to use on his journey to take down that monster, came at, and destroy the machine that birthed it. Dahlgren.
"Master, I sense that light interacts with sphere to create a reflecting wall, and with fire to produce many explosions." "Very good. You are very open to those spirits you now are in communion with, and already have been given the awareness of what that means. You have appropriately mastered the spirit of light, young master. Congratulations."
There was something he was wondering about, though, now that he had a 3rd spirit, and this was the best time to ask.
"Revered master, I have a question. Inside of me, I can feel the bonds between each spirit and another. However, I also feel like there is a connection that requires all 3. I feel it begin to form, but collapse. I don't understand. Are there not ways for the spirits to combine more than one-on-one?"
The Ancient One smiled, with true excited emotion.
Yes. Very good, young master. You are beginning to see the path to true mastery. Very few even realize that the possibility even exists, but for you, it was like instinct. Now, to answer your question, it is difficult, for there are 2 answers. No and yes.
Chesney furrowed his brow.
"I'm not sure I understand you, master."
A serene smile returned to the Ancient One's features.
"No, most do not. Remember, the spirits are not alive. They are law, in action. On your journey, try to understand what the spirits are trying to convey to you. Feel that connection grow, and fail. When you understand why it fails, that is the next step."
Well, that wasn't particularly helpful. I'm trying to save the world here, not understand the deep meaning of the dang universe. Instead of complaining, he bowed, and made to get up. A slight ahem from the old man turned his attention. In between them was a donation bowl. It read, "Suggested donation 100G.
Oh, right. Sorry."
Chesney stammered, fumbling in his pouch to pay the man. And then they left, saying their thanks. "Did I pay those other 2 from before? Mine?" Media's smile seemed to have returned as they stood under the awning of the temple.
"So, how does light feel to you?"
Truth be told, it was very odd. If he gave in to the feeling it produced, it almost made the world seem flat. And when he would look at things, he would simultaneously see the object, and also expect it to fall apart into fine sand.
"It is going to take some getting used to. Everything feels like it's made of sand."
She nodded knowingly.
"Ah, yes, I know what you mean."
He waited for some advice. None came.
"So, wait. Everything is just sand, now?"
She shrugged.
"More or less. You get to understand the feeling more over time. But yes, welcome to Sandland."
He pinched the bridge of his nose in frustration.
"Well, thanks for the heads up. Anyway, where should we go next? See if we can convince the mayor to open up the checkpoint, or go see if we can hire more help."
Media thought for a moment.
"Well, if we can't convince the mayor, having extra help is sort of pointless, isn't it? I guess we will need to be very convincing, then."
Gorf laughed.
"Ha, you're right about that, lad. Now, when you think about it that way, having some muscle behind you would certainly be very convincing."
Media looked mildly horrified.
"Are you two suggesting we try to intimidate the mayor of Jerain To let us pass the checkpoint?
Chesney and Gorf looked at each other and shrugged. Chesney clarified.
I'm just saying, I'm not against it.
Through she tried to suppress it. Medea couldn't help but giggle.
Well, I guess we have to do what we have to do.
She stopped abruptly, saying,
Oh, before I forget, now that you have light, you should have this.
She rummaged around in her bag and handed Chesney a card. He turned it around in his hands. It was something like a playing card, but almost twice as tall. The front was black with a yellow border, and the back was yellow with a black symbol of the spirit of light. The front also had such a symbol, though it was small and at the top. The rest of the card was difficult to describe. It was covered in very small text that he couldn't make out. Text seemed to shimmer and sparkle like it was made with emerald ink. At the bottom was a small oval of a silvery metal. Chesney was at a loss.
What is this?
Medea showed surprise.
You don't know? It's a spirit card. That lady at Daphne's house gave it to us.
It sounded familiar. He tried to think back to when he had heard it.
Oh, right. I think Tiger mentioned something about spirit cards. Something about the crystals he showed us being used to make them. I didn't really think anything of it at the time. So, what's it do?
Medea smiled and put on what Chesney was beginning to call her teacher expression, and said,
Well, these are handy little devices that, once you have a connection with a spirit, you can use to strengthen that connection. You just hold your thumb there on the oval, look at the text, and poof!
Poof? What does poof mean in this context? He looked at the text once more. It was completely illegible. Maybe it wasn't even text, but it sure looked like it. He remembered that the ancient masters said that the spirits weren't really alive, but they were almost like a book. Did that mean that these cards were like the pages of that book? There were so many flaws with that analogy, but he was intrigued. Well, might as well try it. Maybe then it will be more clear how it works. Careful not to bend or break the card, Chesney held his thumb against the shiny metal oval, and looked at the text. There was no change in sensation. The text did not suddenly become legible. He was about to say as much to Medea, when a subtle change did catch his eye. A very small red dot of light appeared in the middle of the card. The instant his eyes locked onto it, there was an incredible bright flash of light. The sensation wasn't painful, but it wasn't pleasant either. The flash felt like it seared not his eyes, but something behind his eyes, like it had seared a thought into his focus, like the light had reached into him, and for a split second made him think something he had never thought before, or understand a subtle concept. And in his mind's eye, in that place where he could almost see the burning flame of fire, and hear the whispers of logic from Sphere, there was a flash of understanding. Like a blink of light in a black room where you can only see a small portion of what was revealed and understand even less. That was what it was like, to see a glimpse of the being of the spirit of light.
Gah!
He cried, closing his eyes to the bright flash and having his vision covered in strangely regular spots, like the illegible text on the card. The card had instantly incinerated, which seemed to have generated the flash of light required for the effect. He had been wondering why she had given it to him, rather than using it herself. These cards, evidently, were single-use only.
Warn me next time.
She giggled.
Sorry, it's a prank I could only pull once. I had to do it. Do you feel it, though? That better connection? Yeah. But, what even was that? How did that work?
He asked, still blinking.
Who can say? Magic from the great ones, I suppose.
Like the bottles, these cards, and who knows what else out there. Gorf just muttered to himself how all the spiritualist mumbo-jumbo was way too complicated for him. Me too, pal. Me too. The trek through the ongoing storm towards the tavern was just as cold and miserable as the day they arrived. The storm hadn't let up in the least, but they were focused on the needs of their journey, and there were bound to be some mercenaries there. When they arrived, they found there was a sign above the door. Medea read it out loud.
The Drunken Kong. Charming. It's a nice place,
Gorf announced.
I've wet my whistle here a few times during my mercenary days. Great place to find work.
It sounded like there was a real party, or real brawl maybe, going on in there. It was rowdy, at any rate, with a lot of shouting and arguing. When they pushed open the door, they were subjected to the powerful stench of sweat and booze. The noise was something else, though. One side of the tavern was taken up by a half-dozen tables, pushed together with a large group of men in armor and hoods all talking at once.
It's a sign. A bad omen. This rain is... The Sky Temple is going to fall. And what's the mayor done? Nothing. This town needs a new leader. All of Nasquat needs someone competent for a change. I hear that Lord Zagos down south has completely united all the tribes down there. And what have we got? A bunch of small, independent settlements. It's chaos. We need real leadership.
On and on, the arguing and shouting continued. The other half of the patrons were doing their best to escape the din, but there was no escaping it. The trio sat down at the bar next to a few others and tried to get the bartender's attention. An old, white-haired Laffery man with a mustache, and long, drooped eyebrows. They were so bushy it was a wonder he could see what he was doing. The man regarded the trio, turned to Gorf and asked,
Hello, sir. Is there anything I can get for you and your, kids? I have some milk and some nasberry juice.
Gorf chuckled and looked over at Chesney.
Oh, I don't know. What will my wee boy have, eh?
Chesney's sour expression only prompted a greater fit of laughter. Medea put a placating hand on his back and ordered a glass of juice, thinking it might help her cold. Gorf got something a bit stronger. Chesney abstained, still too grumpy about being pandered to. While the bartender prepared their drinks, Medea asked,
Might I ask, sir, what has gotten all of them so riled up?
The bartender's expression grew equally grumpy as he looked over at the group making so much noise.
Bunch of locals all fed up with the state of affairs, I guess. Not a lick of sense in the whole lot of 'em. But I'll tell you one thing, I don't trust that one right there in the middle.
They all turned to look at the group. There seemed to be one to which all the rest looked at more than the others. Always had the right thing to say to keep the conversation going. Had some new topic to move to. The figure was hidden beneath a hood. All that could be really made out about their features was that they were on the smaller side, and were apparently a woman, since they wore black lipstick.
She's got the whole group of these boys wrapped around her finger, but I've never seen her before in my life. People are going to get hurt, listening to her.
Chesney kept watching the scene of the rabble unfold. Another thing he began to notice was that another figure seemed to always be near her, but watching everyone else. He was much bigger, and his whole body was hidden. Now a single inch of his skin was visible. This group was trouble, no doubt about it. The only question was it going to be their problem? Chesney certainly hoped not. He had much more important things to worry about than petty local political squabbles. While Medea and Gorf downed their drinks, Chesney turned back and asked,
Mister, we're also looking for any mercenaries. Are there any here?
The bartender was about to respond, when the man beside Chesney spoke up.
Oh, you're looking to hire? Wasn't expecting that.
The man was a Laffery with blonde hair, and wearing a sea-green high-necked martial arts uniform with spiraling golden embroidery. He was tall, and well into his prime. In his hands was a small cup of pale green tea. He had an easy, peaceful smile, but his steel-colored eyes were intensely focused, and even Chesney had to admit his hair was utterly eye-catching. Blonde waves brushed back, complemented by some of the longest and most well-cared-for eyebrows he'd ever seen. They even curled. He's got to wax those. There's no other way. He tried not to reflexively feel his own extremely short eyebrows. Medea paused mid-sip as soon as she saw him. Chesney couldn't resist waving his hand in front of her eyes. For her part, Medea blushed and tried to recompose herself when she realized what she was doing. Quickly recovering, Chesney tried to keep his voice professional.
Yes, we are. My name is Chesney, And this is Midia, and our friend Gorf. I realize it might seem a bit odd to be hired by a couple of kids, but I assure you we are serious. Could you tell me a little bit about yourself? Most certainly. My name is Dan.
His voice was strong, yet polite, succinct, like it was used to only being used when necessary.
I was born to a long line of owners of a martial arts dojo, and as such, I've practiced the art since before I could walk. I left home several years back as part of my personal journey to grow stronger. Primarily, I support myself from the winnings at martial arts tournaments, but when those aren't active, I keep sharp by selling my services as a mercenary. Now, I'd like to ask you a little something as well. Please do. In all my years as a mercenary, I've never been approached by a group such as yours. Please, tell me of your purpose. I simply must know.
Of course. Anyone would ask. But how much do I even say? He wondered.
Well, almost a week ago, a terrible disaster befell Lennis. This rain here in Durain, it's not an accident. Things have happened all over. Hagudo was almost swallowed by lava. Ratsirk was nearly burned down. The nearby camp of Skaru were almost wiped out by a livestock rebellion when something mutated one of the purpbirds into a monster.
Dan seemed quite interested, setting his cup of tea down.
So, these are all related. You're saying...
Chesney nodded.
I strongly believe that a terrible monster, named Kmat, is responsible, and that if it is not stopped, it will destroy the whole world.
Dan's expression turned neutral.
And how were you involved in all this? I was made to be involved. That monster, it destroyed the magic school, far east of here. Everyone was killed, save 3 survivors. The headmaster, someone who just happened to be away at the time, and me. I saw it all happen, and we are the only ones who know what's going on.
Midia and Gorf nodded at the man's incredulous look. He turned back to Chesney.
That's an incredible story, and, assuming I believe it, what exactly are you intending to do?
Chesney sighed.
Honestly, I was hoping I wouldn't have to. I had been led to believe that the great spiritualist Daphne was here and would know what to do about this creature. But she's left town, and I have no choice but to pursue her north. But I can't do it alone. The world is too dangerous, and the longer I journey, the surer I am that there are powerful forces out there doing everything they can to stop me.
Dan's eyes turned contemplative, and he looked down into his cup of tea.
When you say powerful forces are arrayed against you, what do you mean?
Midia piped in.
Right after the magic school was destroyed, my home of Ratsirk was attacked not only by the monster, but a sinister agent kidnapped me. We don't know why, yet. The only clue we got was that he was working for Lord Zagoth.
Dan's eyebrows shot up in surprise.
My. You weren't kidding about powerful forces. And you, what's your stake in all this?
He asked, looking at Gorf, half into his mug. Gorf just answered matter-of-factly.
These 2 kids saved Hagudo from being destroyed. I figured the least I could do was escort them on the next leg of their journey.
Dan smiled, and there was a hint of mischief there.
Yes. I can see why you might have done that. These 2 certainly have that certain magnetism to them, don't they? And they saved Hagudo, you say? I'd love to hear all about that. This is all so incredibly fascinating. Now first I have to ask, have you ever hired a mercenary before?
The 2 children looked at each other, trying to wordlessly communicate how to respond.
Technically, no.
Nodding, Dan began to explain, gesturing with his hands.
Very good. Then allow me to explain. Mercenaries are very much like bodyguards. They will accompany you on journeys, short or long, or perhaps even for a single mission, and fight beside you. We are very much the type to wander, and so usually a client would hire us for a journey to the next town, and afterwards generally part ways, and the mercenary would then look for work there, or decide to move along on their own. Generally, mercenaries charge a large sum up front, on top of having their food and lodging expenses paid by their employer, while either side can terminate the contract at any time. In general, mercenaries will stick around until dismissed. As for myself, my fee is 300 gold. Does that sound amenable to you, young sir? And miss?
Once more, the two looked at each other. Medea had a big silly grin on her face.
Well, I think we should hire him.
She saw Chesney's deadpan expression and then continued, more seriously.
But, I think that should be up to you. I know how you feel about mercenaries.
Dan's eyebrow twitched up, causing his long curls to waver. Chesney waved his hand dismissively.
Long story short, I ran afoul of some really rude and greedy sorts right when I started.
He smiled with as close to genuine appreciation as he could, and extended his hand to the mercenary.
We'd love to hire you.
They shook, and Dan seemed about as excited to be aboard as Medea was to have him, though Chesney was sure it was for different reasons. Girls. Once the fee was paid, Dan's expression turned professional. He said,
Now, as my first official duty as your bodyguard, I strongly urge you to hire that man right over there,
while gesturing to a Sanal man leaning against a wall. The man was coldness personified. Like all Sanal, his face had the odd characteristic of having long thin fins along the jawline. His hair was teal-gray and trimmed very short, though he had a small thin ponytail. He was very well built and wore a very well cared for breastplate. His dark blue eyes were something else, though Chesney had no way of verifying this assumption. His instincts told him they were the eyes of a killer. Cold, dispassionate, observant. Though he didn't seem to be watching anything at all, Chesney couldn't shake the impression the man was watching everything in the bar all at once. Medea seemed startled at the suggestion.
He seems so aloof. I feel like he would just ignore us completely if we asked. Why do you say so, Dan?
Chesney asked. Dan never looked away from the other man as he talked, seeming to be almost lost in a memory.
Well, a few reasons. Chief among them, he's quite skilled and you're lucky he's even here. I've had a few jobs where we've worked together and seen what he can do. And if your journey is as dangerous as you say, you're going to need someone like him. And he is incredibly professional. If you have the money, you'll have him.
Shrugging, Chesney said,
Can't hurt to ask, I guess.
Before he could get up, Gorf clapped a hand on Chesney's shoulder.
I think that's my cue to be heading on my way, lad. I think you're in good hands with Dan here, and I think I'd only slow you down if I stuck around. I've been out of the game too long, I think.
Medea gave him a warm smile.
Well, thank you so much for accompanying us. I can't tell you how much I appreciated your offer right when we really needed it. Will you be okay getting along on your own?
He laughed away her concerns.
Don't you worry about me. I'll be fine. I know the area like the back of my hand. It's you two who are in the real danger. Watch each other's back, and stay safe. And you,
he began, looking at Dan.
Watch after these two, eh? They've had a rough time of it, and there's more comin'.
Dan gave a slight bow.
You have nothing to fear. These two are in good hands.
With that, Gorf downed the last of his mug, let out an amazing belch, and headed out into the storm for home. Thanks for everything, Gorf. The trio got up from the bar and headed to the man.
Zoran, good to see you're still alive.
Dan began, his hands clasped together within long, billowy sleeves. Zoran turned his head, and coolly looked them over one at a time. It made Chesney's skin crawl to be looked at with eyes like those, but he was also not going to be intimidated either. When he was done looking at them, he returned his gaze to the rest of the bar, with special attention to the table of rowdies.
What's the job, kid?
He asked quietly with a deep voice. It was nice to be addressed as the employer first, rather than Dan who had spoken first, but he wasn't sure how he felt about being addressed as kid.
I need an escort north, possibly even further into SA Esquat. Checkpoints closed. Yes, we're going to have a little chat with the mayor after this about that.
Behind Chesney, Medea softly whispered to Dan.
He's rather direct, isn't he?
With only the barest hint of a grin, Dan replied,
"Oh, Miss Midia, you've no idea."
Zurin took a deep breath and let it out slowly. He turned to look Chesney in the eye again, deciding. After a full 10 seconds of awkward silence, it was cut short with the abrupt reply,
500.
Chesney tried not to flinch. They had the money, but it was almost double what they had already paid to Dan. And yet, Dan recommended him so highly.
You're that. Tell me about yourself. What are your skills?
For the first time, he stopped leaning against the wall.
I'm good at what I do, protecting my clients. I'm a spiritualist of water. On top of that, I've mastered the boomerang.
He pulled his weapon out of a sheath at his hip. It was a curved piece of wood with a keen metal edge at the tips. It was immaculately clean.
I specialize in many-on-one combat. Never lost a client. Never failed a job. That's all you need to know. So, we got a deal, kid?
Parts of this man certainly rubbed Chesney the wrong way, but maybe a person like this was exactly what they needed. A no-nonsense professional, who looked like they really knew their way around.
As long as you stop calling me kid, you're hired. You got it, boss?
Chesney groaned as he started counting out the fee.
I take it back. Boss is even worse.
That earned probably the only chuckle Chesney and Midia ever heard from him on the journey. The trek through the rain to the Sky Temple was uneventful, other than it seemed Dan and Zuran had a few short exchanges catching up on each other. Mostly it was Dan talking with Zuran, making noises that could approximate either positive or negative responses. Midia sidled up beside Chesney to say,
I feel like now we have these two. It's like a start to a whole new adventure. Like, up until now was just a prologue or something.
He chuckled softly.
I think you read too many books. But yeah, I can understand how you feel. Like, it's just that little bit more serious now.
Which reminds me, I still have to give her that book. Later, though. Once they stood before the doors to the Sky Temple, he added,
Let's hope our new friends here can help us change the mayor's mind about that checkpoint.
Midia's eyes instantly grew quite serious.
Right.
From down here, the whole Sky Temple complex was mind-bending to stand beneath. A towering structure, lavishly decorated in the greens and pinks that were the main aesthetic theme of Jerain as a whole. Smooth curves of stone to look like roots and leaves, and dozens of small stained glass windows. And then far, far above, the great tower with the huge flower atop it swayed dangerously in the wretched storm winds. The two great doors leading inside were twice as tall as Chesney was, and he was rather tall for his age. They were polished green metal, embossed with broad-leaf designs. In the center of each was the 3 teardrop symbols that Sophie's crown had. Chesney pushed them both open and stepped into the interior, with everyone following close behind. The interior was even more striking than the exterior, and Chesney had never seen anything of its like before. The room was cavernous, and all the walls surrounding the dozens of stained glass windows were covered in beautiful painted frescoes and carved murals. The floor was covered in deep blue tile that was polished to a mirror shine. It was hard to fully understand the actual purpose of the room, though. It seemed to be part reception hall, part place of worship, with a little bit of office space mixed in. In the center of the room was a raised platform with a podium. Before it, several rows of pews. At the back of the room, a large round shaft with a metal door flanked by 2 heavily armored guards. On the left side of the room was a similar shaft, guarded by a single guard, and right before them was a wide, polished reception desk, with a bespectacled young Sanal woman seated before it. She seemed completely unprepared to respond to the presence of the group.
Can I help you?
She said sheepishly, eyes darting between the 4 of them, lingering on Zuran's cold, deadpan stare.
We need to speak with the mayor. It's urgent.
Chesney answered. In the same reluctant voice, she asked,
Do you happen to be part of the SAAA Esquat Diplomatic Corps?
At their response to the negative, she visibly relaxed and seemed quite relieved.
Oh, thank goodness. They've been coming by for days, but the mayor keeps finding excuses for not meeting with them. Just go to the elevator back there. Oh, and, welcome to the Sky Temple. And be sure to pick up a souvenir idol of Rega on your way out.
They all made their way to the back of the hall, past a few bustling clerks, and entered the elevator. The two guards barely paid them any attention. Well, this is starting out well so far, I guess. Medea seemed to be vacillating between trying to be serious and being intensely interested in the elevator. As it began to move, she even jumped a little in surprise. As they rose, they found that there were small slits in the side of the shaft, and that the interior of the elevator was glass, so they could see themselves quickly rising into the sky.
This elevator is way more interesting than the one in the Tower of Gabnid. This one is all open and inviting. The other one was just dark and creepy. I don't think I've ever been in an elevator before,
Medea said, looking at Chesney.
There was one in the Tower of Gabnid, too.
He nodded.
Yeah. It was filled with all kinds of technology I couldn't really understand. Really didn't seem like it was supposed to be visited by people, though. Seemed cold and functional.
Just then, the elevator lurched to the side a bit, causing the party to stumble. After a screech, the elevator began moving once more. Medea screamed and latched onto the nearest person, who happened to be Dan.
Sorry,
she said, shutting her eyes and smacking her cheeks. Her expression returned to serious neutrality.
I'll be better. Oh, it's quite all right, Miss Medea. No trouble at all.
Shortly thereafter, the elevator slowed to a stop, and let them out. Chesney gasped in astonishment.
No way.
They entered into what must be the large blue stamen structure as seen from the ground. Everything was made of glass, or crystal, or some other transparent material. The entire structure was like a huge sphere with several floors. From here, they could see almost everything, and all of Jerain lay below them. This is not the place to work if you are afraid of heights. Chesney looked to Medea. She was hiding it very well, but he could tell she was trying to stay looking forward, and that her breathing had changed. He led the way away from the elevator to a set of stairs with another guard nearby.
The mayor? Just up there. Fair warning, he talks a lot,
he said in a bored tone. His armor wasn't even tightened properly. Dan shook his head very slightly in disapproval. They walked past and up the stairs. The main floor was the widest, and most grandly decorated. It was impacted with furniture, since that would hurt the sight lines of all the glass. But what was there was particularly fine. An ornately carved desk, freshly polished, a receiving area with some comfortable-looking chairs and a coffee table. In a vase on the table was a Sophie lily, with healthy-looking pink petals, and on the walls were paintings of 3 indistinct figures. One, bearing a sword, another, holding a book, and the last, arms wide. Sat behind the desk, amongst all his finery, was an aged Laffrey man, whom Chesney presumed was the mayor. He was the least impressive thing in the room. He was thin, and meek, and droopy. He actually jumped ever so slightly when he noticed the group's approach.
Oh, you are not with the Squad, diplomatic corps by any chance?
Medea and Chesney exchanged a pained look that seemed to convey their equal incredulity. This man is the mayor of Jerain? Clearing his throat, Chesney began.
No, sir. We are travelers, who came looking for the great spiritualist, Daphne. We were hoping.
The mayor interrupted him, as though he was only half paying attention, or perhaps had latched on to the only thing he recognized.
Oh, Daphne. Yes. No, I'm sorry, but she's no longer here. She's gone to the equator.
Holding back a biting reply at being interrupted, Chesney continued.
Yes, I know that, which is why I want you to let us through the northern checkpoint.
The mayor nodded along, and kept nodding for a few moments after Chesney had stopped talking. Once he realized there was a silence, he stammered,
Go past the checkpoint? You can't. It's been sealed to traffic.
Chesney's hands balled into fists. He desperately wanted to break something. Was the mayor this completely useless, or was this just how he avoided responsibility?
I know that, sir. We want you to open it.
Almost before Chesney finished talking, the mayor's head was shaking very fast.
Oh, no, no, no. It's so dangerous. Out there. Beasts. And, of course, certain diplomatic tensions. Yes. You see, I couldn't possibly,
he said, trailing off mid-sentence as he got a better look at Medea and squinted.
My word, is that Sophie's crown?
Boo! All eyes turned to her.
Yes, it is.
The mayor crawled onto the desk with some newfound energy to look at it more closely, pulling out a set of reading glasses and using them like a magnifying glass.
Great Gabnid, it is. Oh, lost for thousands of years, and here it is. Saved, saved, saved.
He jumped off the desk and grabbed Medea's hands, and began to dance and twirl.
Wait, what? Sir, what are you?
She protested, but wasn't exactly going to smack an old man, and was forced to go on with the twirling. A hand came down hard on the mayor's shoulder, stopping the revelry off abruptly. It was Zoran. He fixed his cold, emotionless gaze at him.
I think you'd better properly explain.
Dan hid a grin under cover of his sleeve. Medea gave Zoran an appreciative nod. The mayor tried not to shrink into his own body and began to explain.
Yes. Well, you see, several days ago this terrible storm began, and something happened to the power supply to the Sky Temple. It's been wobbling ever since, and very soon it will fall, I'm afraid. And so why haven't you gotten people to evacuate?
Chesney asked, already done with this conversation.
Evacuate? In an election year? Tish-tosh, my boy. No, all we need is to go down into the Temple of Raya, the idol of evil, and reactivate the power transfer, and everything will be fixed.
Chesney pinched the bridge of his nose and replied with a voice that slowly rose to a frustrated shout.
I don't even know where to start with this. What's this Temple of Evil thing? Why is the power to the Sky Temple coming from a place like that? And for that matter, why even have a temple to an evil idol in the first place? And moreover, why are you telling me? The Temple of Raya, my boy, keep up, keep up. Far below the Sky Temple, there is the temple consecrated to Raya, the idol of evil. The Sky Temple is consecrated to Rega. And I'm telling you because that crown is the only way to reconnect the power. It's easy. Just go to the underground temple, find the idol to Raya, use the crown there, then come back up here and use it on the idol to Rega up here. Boom. Simple. You'll do it, won't you?
I feel like you skipped over a lot of my questions, old man. Chesney wanted to argue, but he knew no matter what he tried, it was just going to be inevitable. He let out a long-suffering sigh.
Okay, old man. We will do your little mission for you. But when I get back up here, I expect to see a pass to the checkpoint sitting on your desk, ready for me. And if it isn't, you're going to lose more than the upcoming election.
Steaming, he turned on his heels and stomped out of the room.
Oh, you bet. Straight away, young man,
he called after. They found themselves in the elevator once more, heading down.
Have you ever heard of this Raya thing before, Medea?
Chesney asked. She shrugged her shoulders.
Nope. First I've heard of it. Why would you even build a temple to something evil in the first place? And then, integrate it with this Sky Temple to boot?
To everyone's shock, Zoran interjected in his same deadpan tone.
According to some scholars, Raya is the remnant of one of the gods worshipped by the people of Lennis prior to the arrival of the Great Ones. As a show of faith, the new temple, built in honor of the Great Ones, was built on top of the old one, to replace it. Soon, it's theorized, worship of the old god came to be seen as regressive and transformed culturally into a representation of evil.
All three of them stared at him. He didn't say anything else, but there was still the tiniest hint of a blush there, though Chesney couldn't tell if it was just a trick of the light either. None of them had the courage to press him for further details on how he knew something like that. However, not long after, they stood before the guard of the other elevator shaft in the lobby. He eyed them up and down.
So, he's finally sent someone to fix the power supply. Well, about time. Let's go.
To their surprise, the guard got in the elevator with them. This elevator wasn't nearly as nice looking as the one above. It wasn't exactly a service elevator, but it was certainly in a disused state.
Listen, down there? It ain't safe. You gotta watch your back.
Dan asked.
Please, elaborate, sir.
The guard shook his head.
Ugh, it's so hard to really explain. There's beasts down there, sure. Gold goblins will take over anything left alone for long enough. But there's other things there nobody can really explain. It's just evil down there. People see things, impossible things, justice. Be careful. If things go bad, you run back to the elevator. I'll send it down when I get back up, just in case.
Well, that wasn't ominous at all. They descended in silence the rest of the way. They all checked their equipment. Chesney and Midia tightened their armor. Duran inspected the blades on his boomerang, and Dan tightened his boots and readied 2 tonfas. He didn't think he believed in actual evil, but Chesney couldn't help but feel that something in the air was changing the further down they traveled. The lights in the elevator made everyone's features seem sallow and solemn. The air grew heavy, and though he tried to fight it, his thoughts turned to his nightmare. Everyone, waiting for him to join them, blaming him, cursing him for living when they didn't. But those emotions, they didn't come from those that died. It came from his own self-blame. Luliette was in the dream, but she had survived. That proved it was all in his head. It's not real. It's not my fault. Focus. One step, and another. Keep moving. The elevator slowed, stopped, and the door opened into darkness and silence.